Not a single camera flash could capture the look on Mr. Alcott's face when his son laughed for the first time in months. It was a laugh that didn't belong to the sprawling mansion or the rows of imported cars outside. It belonged to a little boy holding a small, handcrafted wooden toy that squeaked when it rolled and whistled when it turned. The toy wasn't bought from any luxury designer or imported from Europe. It came from a dusty factory on the edge of the city, built by a man whose name the billionaire didn't even know. Not yet. The boy's name was Ethan Alcott, 7 years old, with eyes too old for his age and legs that had stopped working after the accident. The house had grown quieter since that day. No piano playing, no laughter echoing through the halls, only the hum of machines and the sterile whisper of medical equipment. Mr. Alcott had done everything money could do. Specialists, surgeries, rehabilitation programs, experimental therapies, all of it. But what haunted him most wasn't the silence of his son's wheelchair. It was the look of quiet detachment in Ethan's eyes. The boy who used to build towers from Lego now stared out windows unmoved, until one afternoon when the head housekeeper entered the study, holding a small brown package with no return address. "Sir," she said softly, "this came for the boy." Inside was a toy car, simple, wooden, shaped by hand. The wheels weren't perfectly aligned, the paint chipped slightly at the edges. But it had character. Someone had carved Ethan's name across the bottom, rough but careful, like they'd done it with love, not precision. The billionaire almost threw it out. It wasn't sanitary. It wasn't safe. It wasn't professional. But Ethan saw it, reached out for it, and, for the first time since the crash, smiled. That night, Mr. Alcott watched from the doorway as his son rolled the toy across the rug, making soft sounds of laughter. The wooden wheels clacked against the marble floor like tiny heartbeats. He didn't know it yet, but that sound would change everything. Over the next few days, Ethan wouldn't let the toy out of his sight. He took it everywhere, to meals, to therapy, even to bed. When it broke after being dropped down the stairs, Ethan cried like he'd lost a friend. Mr. Alcott called his assistant immediately. "Find out who made it," he ordered. "Every craftsman, every store, every supplier that could have sent this. I don't care what it takes." 2 days later, the assistant came back with an address, a small toy factory across town, one that was barely staying afloat. Its owner was a man named Daniel Reed. Daniel had no idea the package had even reached the mansion. To him, it was one of dozens of handmade toys he built at night after his shifts, hoping one would make a child somewhere happy. He didn't know it had ended up in the hands of the richest man in the city. When the black car pulled up outside his factory, Daniel thought it was a mistake. Men in suits stepped out first, followed by Mr. Alcott himself, tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who looked like he'd never set foot in a place that smelled of sawdust and oil. Daniel wiped his hands on his apron, confused. "Can I help you?" The billionaire didn't speak right away. He walked around the workshop, running his fingers over the rough wooden toys stacked on the shelves. No polished plastics, no glossy logos, just raw craftsmanship, imperfect but alive. "You made a toy car," Alcott finally said, his voice low but deliberate. "A wooden one. For a boy named Ethan." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, I remember that one. Didn't think anyone noticed." "Why is there something wrong with it?" Alcott looked up. For a man used to buying perfection, that question struck differently. "Something wrong?" he echoed. "No, it's the only thing that's been right in a very long time." For the first time, Daniel saw the sadness in the billionaire's eyes, the weight of a father who could buy the world but couldn't fix his child's smile. Without another word, Alcott did something none of the factory workers could believe. He invited Daniel to dinner. That night, the mansion glowed like a palace. The scent of roasted herbs filled the marble halls. Daniel had never seen ceilings that high, or a dining table long enough to need 3 servants just to set it. He stood awkwardly near the entrance, feeling the weight of every polished surface and every curious gaze. Ethan sat at the table, his toy car in his lap. When he saw Daniel, his face lit up. "You made it," he said, voice full of wonder. Daniel smiled shyly. "You like it?" "It's my favorite thing," Ethan whispered. Mr. Alcott watched the exchange in silence. For once, he wasn't thinking about numbers or business. He was watching his son connect, not through doctors, not through therapy, but through a simple act of human creation. Dinner was quiet at first. The billionaire asked polite questions, Daniel gave nervous answers. But as the night went on, something shifted. They began to talk, really talk. About childhoods, about dreams, about the things money can't buy and the things love can still fix. Daniel spoke about his own father, who taught him to carve wood because they couldn't afford store-bought toys. How he'd never forgotten the feeling of holding something made just for him. Kids feel that, Daniel said softly, when something's made with care. They don't care if it's perfect. They just care that someone thought about them. Alcott looked at his son turning the wooden car over in his hands. He suddenly felt small in his own home. For years, he'd given his boy everything except the one thing that mattered most: connection. As dinner ended, Alcott made a quiet offer. "What if we work together? You make the toys, I make sure they reach every child who needs them. No brand names, no corporations. Just joy?" Daniel hesitated. "You'd want to do that with me?" The billionaire smiled faintly. "You gave my son something I couldn't. Seems only fair I return the favor." Outside, the night air was crisp. The city lights shimmered in the distance, reflecting off the black car waiting at the gate. Inside the mansion, Ethan had fallen asleep holding the toy. Daniel turned to leave, still unsure if the whole night had been a dream. But as he reached the door, Alcott's voice stopped him. "One more thing," he said quietly. "That toy you built, did you make it for someone in particular?" Daniel hesitated, eyes distant. "Yeah," he said after a long pause. "For my daughter. She passed away last year. I kept making them because it helped me feel like I was still building something for her." The silence that followed was heavy. Not uncomfortable, just real. Alcott nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then I think she'd be proud." For the first time in years, the billionaire didn't feel like the richest man in the room. As Daniel walked out into the night, he didn't notice the assistant watching from the upstairs window, phone in hand, a quiet message being sent to someone. He's the one. What do we do next? Because behind the kindness of that dinner invitation, something else was unfolding. Something Daniel couldn't see yet. Something that would change both their lives forever. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his small apartment above the factory, the smell of varnish and pine still lingering in the air, replaying the evening over and over again in his mind. The marble floors, the way the chandeliers seemed to hum when the air conditioner started, the look in Ethan's eyes when he said, "You made it." That look had haunted him, not in a bad way, but in the kind of way that sits quietly behind your ribs, reminding you that maybe the world still holds something good. The next morning, he arrived at the factory early. The machines were cold, the lights flickering weakly, as if unsure whether to wake up. He turned them on one by one, the rhythmic hum filling the space, steady and familiar. But his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about Alcott's last words. "Then I think she'd be proud." It was strange how a stranger could say something so deeply personal, so simply, and make it sound like truth. By noon, he was back to sanding down a batch of small toy boats when he heard the crunch of tires outside. He looked through the dusty window, another black car. He wiped his hands on his jeans, heart thudding a little faster. A woman stepped out this time. Sharp suit, tablet in hand, hair pulled back in a way that said she didn't make small talk. She introduced herself as Ms. Vale, Alcott's head of philanthropy. "Mr. Alcott would like to formalize your arrangement," she said briskly, scanning the cluttered workshop. "He believes your work could be scaled. With proper funding, of course. He envisions a joint initiative, handcrafted toys for children in hospitals and rehabilitation centers." Daniel blinked, unsure whether to be flattered or terrified. "Scaled, you mean mass production?" She smiled politely. "Not quite mass. Curated, but consistent. Replicable. We'd keep your designs but improve output." He looked around at his tools, the worn chisels, the uneven benches, the dust dancing in the sunlight. "These aren't things you replicate," he said softly. "Each one's different." Ms. Vale didn't seem moved. "Different doesn't reach thousands, Mr. Reed. But with our help, your work could reach millions." That night, Daniel stayed in the factory long after everyone had gone home. He traced his finger along the grain of a half-finished wooden train, feeling its imperfections. Could he really let this become a brand, a product line? Would it still mean the same thing? But then he thought of Ethan's laugh. The way it had filled that enormous house like a bell. Maybe that sound was worth compromising for. 2 weeks later, he was standing inside a gleaming glass building, the Alcott Group headquarters. The walls were lined with digital displays showing prototypes of his toys, redesigned with corporate polish. The wooden texture replaced by sleek finishes, the hand-painted wheels now laser-cut to precision. Daniel felt like he was watching a ghost of his own work, something that looked alive but wasn't breathing. Mr. Alcott entered the room, his usual composure softening as he saw Daniel's expression. "You don't like it?" Daniel hesitated. "It's beautiful, but it's not mine anymore." Alcott studied the prototypes. "When I was young, my father used to say perfection is the closest thing to permanence. But maybe that's not true. Maybe what lasts isn't what's perfect, and it's what's loved." He turned to Daniel, his eyes thoughtful. "Let's do it your way. Small batches, handmade, real wood, real people behind every piece." For a moment, Daniel saw not the billionaire, but the father. And so the project began. They called it Ethan's Workshop, a partnership between Alcott's resources and Daniel's craft. The toys were built in the same dusty factory, but now the workers had new equipment, fair wages, and, for the first time, hope. Ethan visited often. He'd roll his chair through the aisles, laughing with the workers, helping paint details onto unfinished toys. Daniel started teaching him little tricks, how to sand the edges, how to fix a crooked axle. One afternoon, as the golden light filtered through the windows, Ethan looked up and said, "My legs don't work anymore, but when I build these, it feels like I can still run." Daniel froze. He didn't know how to respond. But something broke open inside him, a place that had been closed since his daughter Lily died. From that day, Ethan became more than just a boy he'd made a toy for. He became a reminder that creation could heal what tragedy destroyed. But the higher something rises, the longer its shadow becomes. One evening, Daniel returned to the factory to find the lights already on. Inside, Ms. Vale was speaking to a group of executives. Their tone was brisk, numbers flashing across screens. "Production's too slow," one said. "Demand's rising faster than output. We need to automate." "Mr. Alcott agreed to a handmade model," another argued. Ms. Vale's voice cut through, cold and steady. "Mr. Alcott won't be in charge much longer." Daniel stepped forward. "What do you mean by that?" The room fell silent. Ms. Vale turned, her smile tight. "You shouldn't be here." "Answer me." She closed her tablet. "Mr. Alcott's health has been declining. The board believes it's time to transition leadership. We can't let sentimentality compromise efficiency." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "This isn't about efficiency. It's about heart. You take that away, you've got nothing." She didn't respond, just turned and walked out. That night, Daniel drove to the mansion. The gates opened without question. They knew him by now. Inside, he found Alcott in his study, pale under the lamplight, a glass of untouched water beside him. "You're sick," Daniel said quietly. Alcott smiled faintly. "Old men and stress, not a winning combination." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it doesn't change what needs to be done." He leaned back, voice weakening. "The company. It's not as simple as it used to be. There are people who see compassion as a liability. They don't understand what this project really means." "Then let me fight for it," Daniel said. "For Ethan, for you." Alcott looked at him for a long time, then nodded slowly. "If you're going to fight, you'll need proof." The next morning, Daniel began digging. He reviewed documents, emails, supply contracts, anything that could show the board's intent to take control. What he found chilled him. Ms. Vale and her team had been diverting funds, falsifying production data, and quietly building a separate automated facility under the Alcott name. They were planning to phase out the factory, and Daniel, entirely. By the time he returned to the mansion, the air was heavy with tension. 2 black cars already sat in the driveway. Inside, raised voices echoed down the hall. He found Ms. Vale standing opposite Alcott, her expression controlled, almost rehearsed. "You can't stop this," she said. "The board has voted." Alcott's hand trembled slightly on the cane. "You think I built this empire so people like you could turn it into a machine?" "It already is a machine," she replied. "You just stopped noticing." Daniel stepped between them. "You're not shutting it down." She turned to him, calm but dangerous. "Mr. Reed, you have no authority here." Alcott's voice broke through, hoarse but firm. He has mine. For a moment, everything froze. Then Ms. Vale smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then I hope you're ready for a war, gentlemen. She left without another word. In the weeks that followed, the tension grew. The board launched audits, investigations, and quiet whispers in the press about mismanagement. Orders slowed. Suppliers hesitated. The factory workers grew nervous. Ethan sensed it. He'd stopped by the workshop watching his father and Daniel with quiet worry. Are they going to take it away? He asked one afternoon. Daniel crouched beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Not if we keep building. The boy nodded, gripping his wooden car tighter. But Alcott was fading. The illness spread faster than anyone expected. He stopped showing up at meetings, then stopped leaving his room altogether. One night he called Daniel to his bedside. You'll have to take care of him, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel frowned. Ethan, of course, Alcott shook his head weakly. Not just him. The dream. The reason this started. Don't let them turn it into another business. Daniel swallowed hard. I won't. Alcott smiled faintly, his hand finding Daniel's. You remind me of who I used to be. The monitors beside the bed beeped steadily. Outside, the storm began to roll in, and then, with one long exhale, the sound flattened. The city mourned. The headlines spoke of legacy, empire, and fortune. But in a small corner of that empire, a wooden toy sat quietly on a hospital nightstand. A toy that had changed the life of one boy and the heart of one man. At the funeral, rain streaked across the black umbrellas like tears. Ms. Vale stood a few steps away from the casket, unreadable. When it ended, she approached Daniel, her voice low. The board moves forward tomorrow, she said. The factory closes next month. There's nothing you can do. Daniel looked at her, soaked but steady. You're wrong. She raised an eyebrow. And why is that? He glanced past her, toward the boy in the wheelchair holding the wooden car against his chest. Because he remembers, Daniel said. And as long as he remembers, the story isn't over. She followed his gaze. But by the time she turned back, Daniel was already walking away, the rain blurring his figure into a silhouette. Somewhere behind him, thunder rolled over the city like an omen, and in that moment, the war for Ethan's workshop had begun. The rain didn't stop that night. It came down in long, endless sheets that turned the streets into rivers and washed the city in a metallic glow. Inside the factory, the machines stood silent. The workers had gone home early, not because of the weather, but because they knew something was ending. Daniel stood alone at his workbench, staring at the unfinished toy in his hands. A small wooden bird, wings carved mid-flight, the kind of thing he used to make for Lily. But tonight his hands shook too much to finish it. The factory felt heavier than usual, every sound swallowed by the storm outside. He thought of Alcott's final words. Don't let them turn it into another business. The phrase echoed between the walls like a warning, like the creak of a door that should never be opened. The next morning, the factory gates were locked. A notice was pinned to the metal. Property of Alcott Group Holdings. Pending restructuring. Daniel read it twice, the ink bleeding from the rain. Around him, a few workers stood helpless, whispering among themselves. One of them, an older man named Jorge, shook his head. They're saying production's moving to the new facility out east. Machines can do what we do, only faster. Daniel's jaw tightened. They can copy the shape, he said quietly, but they'll never copy the soul. That afternoon, he went to the mansion to see Ethan. The boy was in his room, surrounded by stacks of unfinished prototypes. He looked up as Daniel entered, face pale but alert. They told me the factory's closing. Daniel forced a smile. Not if I can help it. Ethan frowned, tracing his fingers over a carved toy boat. Dad wouldn't have let them. The words hit harder than the boy knew. Daniel knelt beside him. Your dad believed in this place because of you, Ethan. Because you reminded him why it mattered. That doesn't go away just because he's gone. Ethan looked out the window. They said I shouldn't get involved. That it's business. Business doesn't laugh, Daniel said. It doesn't build toys for sick kids. It doesn't make a boy smile again. The boy's eyes glistened, and for a moment Daniel saw the same spark that had brought Alcott to the factory that first day. Then Ethan reached under his pillow and pulled something out. A small wooden key carved unevenly, painted blue. My dad gave me this before he got sick, he said. He said when I was ready I'd know what had opened. Daniel took it carefully, turning it over in his hand. It was rough, unpolished, clearly handmade, but there was something familiar about the grain, the angle of the cut. It looked like the kind of wood they used in the factory. "What do you think it's for?" Ethan asked. Daniel looked at the key, then back at the boy. "I think your dad's still helping us." That night he went back to the factory. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and cold. He searched every corner, the offices, the storage rooms, the workshop. Finally, behind a stack of unused crates, he found a locked cabinet built into the wall. The key fit perfectly. Inside were folders, old ones, marked with dates and signatures. Contracts, handwritten notes, blueprints. But at the very back, wrapped in a sheet of oil paper, was something stranger. A small wooden box with the words Project Emberlight burned into the lid. He opened it. Inside were letters from Alcott to himself, each one dated in the months leading up to his death. The first read, "If you're reading this, Daniel, it means the company has turned against what we built. They'll tell you this was about charity. It wasn't. Emberlight wasn't a project, and it was a test." A test? Daniel unfolded the next letter. "We started Ethan's workshop not just to make toys, but to measure something. Something I could never prove through business. Joy leaves a trace, Daniel. When a child feels love, it changes more than mood. It changes matter. I've seen it. These toys, yours, hold something science can't name." Daniel stared at the words, his pulse quickening. He remembered how Ethan's wooden car had survived dozens of falls, how the paint never chipped quite right, how it always seemed to hum faintly when the boy rolled it across the floor. He'd dismissed it as coincidence. But what if it wasn't? He turned the page. They wanted to turn it into technology or monetize it. Vale found out. That's why you're in danger. If she gets her hands on the data, they'll strip it of meaning and sell it as product. Protect the workshop, Daniel. Protect Ethan. And if you ever doubt yourself, remember the wood remembers too. The letters ended there. He sat in silence, the sound of the ticking wall clock suddenly deafening. "The wood remembers," he whispered to himself. What had Alcott discovered? The next day, Daniel met with one of the remaining workers, Jorge, and together they reopened the factory quietly. They started testing, sanding toys, breaking them apart, studying the fibers under light. And it was there, under the microscope, that Daniel saw something impossible, a faint shimmer in the wood like light frozen beneath the grain. He stared, heart pounding. It was as if the wood had absorbed something unseen, emotion, memory, maybe even energy. And all the toys showing that pattern were the ones made by hand, with care, not machines. But someone else knew too. That night, when Daniel returned to his apartment, the door was ajar. Inside, the letters were gone. The box, the key, and everything. Only one thing remained, a new envelope on the table, marked with the Alcott Group seal. Inside was a single line typed in clean black font. "Stop digging. Mr. Reed, you're building more than toys now." His chest tightened. They were watching him. He drove through the night straight to the mansion. Ethan was awake, waiting, as if he knew he would come. "They took something, didn't they?" the boy asked quietly. Daniel nodded. "Your father was right about her. About all of them. They're after something he found, something real." Ethan's eyes widened. "You think that's why he started the workshop?" "I think that's why they ended it." Outside, a car engine rumbled in the distance. Daniel walked to the window and saw two dark sedans parked by the gate. Silhouettes inside, unmoving, waiting. He turned to Ethan. "You need to pack a bag. We're leaving." The boy hesitated. "Where will we go?" Daniel looked back at the glowing lights beyond the trees, the city that had swallowed so much of their lives. "Somewhere your father can still help us." He took the key from his pocket, not the wooden one, but a new one, cold and silver, the kind used for storage units. Alcott's name was scratched faintly into the metal. Daniel had found it taped to the underside of the wooden box before it disappeared. He didn't know what had opened yet, but he knew it was waiting. As they left the mansion, the rain started again, soft at first, then harder. The headlights cut through the dark, reflecting off the wet road. Ethan sat beside him, the wooden car clutched in his lap. Halfway down the empty highway, Daniel finally exhaled. "Your dad was trying to tell us something," he said. Something bigger than toys. Bigger than business. Ethan looked out the window. Do you think the toys really remember? Daniel didn't answer, because in the quiet hum of the car he swore he heard a faint, almost imperceptible sound coming from the toy in Ethan's hands, a gentle vibration like a heartbeat. The boy looked down, eyes wide, and when Daniel turned his head he saw it too, a soft, golden light pulsing from the cracks in the wood. Neither of them spoke. The car kept moving through the rain, the glow between them flickering like a living thing, as if the toy, the one that started everything and had just woken up. The road curved along the edge of the river, silver water glinting beneath the rain. The world outside the car was a blur, streaks of light and shadow blending together as if refusing to take shape. Daniel's hands were tight on the wheel. Every instinct told him to turn back, but something stronger, something he couldn't name, kept pushing him forward. The wooden car glowed faintly in Ethan's lap, the light pulsing slower now like a heartbeat finding its rhythm. Neither of them had spoken in miles. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was thick, electric, charged with the weight of what they didn't yet understand. Finally, Ethan broke it. Do you think it's alive? Daniel didn't answer right away. He could feel the question echo in the back of his mind, pressing against the edges of logic. I think, he said carefully, it's remembering. Remembering what? He glanced at the boy, the way the faint gold reflected in his eyes. Maybe what it was made for, or who it was made by. Ethan looked down again, fingertips brushing the toy as if it could hear him. It feels warm. Daniel reached over, resting a hand on the dashboard to steady himself. The glow had a rhythm, faint, consistent, almost like breathing. It wasn't natural light. It wasn't electricity either. It was something quieter, deeper, something that made the air hum softly around it. They reached the edge of the city before dawn. The highway signs gave way to narrow roads lined with trees, then to open fields. The rain had stopped, replaced by a fog that rolled low and heavy across the ground. In the distance, through the mist, the shape of a storage facility appeared, a cluster of metal buildings by the water. Daniel parked the car. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air outside was still, the only sound the soft ticking of the cooling engine. Ethan was the first to speak. Is this it? Daniel nodded slowly. It should be. He got out, the gravel crunching under his boots. The air smelled like rain-soaked iron. Ethan followed, wrapped in his jacket, still holding the glowing toy close. The building matched the address engraved faintly on the key's tag. A large unit at the far end, number 47. Its door was rusted at the edges, the padlock tarnished. Daniel inserted the key, and for a second it didn't turn. Then, with a click that echoed like a gunshot, the lock gave way. The door rolled open with a groan. Inside, rows of shelves stretched into the darkness, boxes stacked neatly, covered in dust. At the far wall, something glimmered, faint light reflecting off glass. Daniel flicked on a small flashlight and stepped forward. Each box held a toy, handcrafted, familiar, and yet different. Wooden cars, trains, dolls, all shaped like Daniel's designs but with subtle variations. Some had carvings along the edges, patterns he didn't recognize. Others looked burned, as if tested under heat. He opened one of the lids. Inside, a small wooden plane lay wrapped in linen. Its wings were smooth, but faint lines ran through them like veins. He tilted it under the light and saw it, the same shimmer he'd seen under the microscope. Only this time it moved, pulsing faintly, like something alive inside the grain. What is this place? Ethan whispered. Daniel scanned the shelves. A faded label above them read, Prototype Storage, Ember Light Division. Your father built these, Daniel said, voice barely audible. But why hide them? He turned toward a desk at the back of the room. A monitor sat there, disconnected, covered in a layer of dust. He wiped it clean, found a hard drive beside it, and plugged it into his laptop. The screen flickered, then came to life with a soft hum. Video files. Dozens of them, all time-stamped over the last 3 years. Daniel opened the first. The footage was grainy, handheld. Alcott sat at a workbench, the camera angled close. He looked younger, stronger, the weariness that marked his final months not yet visible. He spoke softly, like a man thinking aloud. Phase 1 results, inconclusive. The energy seems to respond to emotional input. The more care in the crafting process, the stronger the resonance. It's not mechanical, it's... Human. He paused, looking past the camera. If consciousness can leave a trace, if love can alter matter, then maybe loss can too. Maybe that's why Ethan's toys react differently. Maybe they remember his mother. Daniel froze. He hadn't known much about Ethan's mother. No one ever spoke of her. Alcott continued, voice trembling slightly. If I can find a way to stabilize it, maybe I can give him something back. Maybe memory isn't just thought. Maybe it's alive. The video cut out. Ethan stood beside Daniel, pale. He was trying to bring her back. Daniel opened another file. This time, the footage showed the mansion's basement. Rows of wooden toys arranged in a circle, wires connected to sensors. Alcott spoke off camera. They think this is about innovation, but it's resurrection, in a way. Every toy carries an echo, a heartbeat of whoever made it, whoever loved it. The camera panned to one of the toys, a small wooden car. Ethan's car. Daniel exhaled slowly. The truth settled heavy in his chest. Alcott hadn't just been building toys for joy. He'd been experimenting with the energy of memory, emotion, grief itself. The boy's voice broke the silence. So that's why it glows? Daniel nodded. He poured everything into it. Every moment he couldn't give you after your mom died. Every ounce of love he thought he lost. Ethan stared at the car in his hands. The light flickered stronger as if responding to his heartbeat. And then the screen went black. The laptop's power cut off. Daniel looked up sharply. The door to the unit had closed. A shadow moved behind the frosted glass window. Ethan, he whispered, stay behind me. Footsteps approached, steady, deliberate. Then the door creaked open again and a figure stepped into the light. Ms. Vale. Her expression was calm, but her eyes gleamed cold. You found it, she said. I was hoping you would. Daniel clenched his fists. What do you want? What your friend Alcott was too afraid to finish, she said. He called it memory resonance. I call it the future. She stepped closer, her shoes echoing on the concrete. Do you have any idea what this could mean? Energy stored in emotion. Devices powered by memory itself. Immortality in wood and wire. That's not what he wanted, Daniel said. He wanted to heal, not control. She smiled faintly. And look where that got him. Ethan stepped forward, holding the glowing car. You can't take it. Her gaze dropped to the toy, and for the first time her expression flickered. Fascination, even awe. So that's the prototype. The only complete one. Daniel moved between them. You'll have to go through me. Ms. Vale tilted her head. You think I need to? She reached into her coat and pressed a small remote. Instantly, the lights above began to flicker. The boxes around them started to hum, soft at first, then louder, like hundreds of small hearts beating in unison. The glow from the stored toys intensified, pulsing in rhythm with Ethan's car. What did you do? Daniel shouted over the sound. Activated them, she said. Your friend didn't just build toys. He built a network all linked by the same frequency, one that responds to human emotion. Ethan cried out as the car in his hands grew hot, the light almost blinding. Daniel grabbed it, pulling him back, shielding him from the surge. Then just as suddenly as it began, everything went still. The hum stopped. The glow faded. The only sound was Ethan's ragged breathing. When Daniel looked up, Miss Vale was gone. The door swung open, a trail of wet footprints leading into the night. He turned back to Ethan. The toy's light had dimmed, but inside the grain, faint symbols had appeared. Lines and shapes burned into the wood like a map. Daniel held it close, tracing the patterns with his thumb. They weren't random. They were coordinates. He looked at Ethan. Your father wasn't trying to bring someone back, he said slowly. He was trying to lead us somewhere. The boy's eyes widened. Where? Daniel looked out into the fog where the first light of dawn was breaking. I don't know, he said, but whatever it is, it's still calling. The dawn stretched like a bruise across the horizon, pale light bleeding into the fog, turning the air gold and gray at once. The world felt suspended, neither awake nor asleep, as if even time was holding its breath. Daniel stood at the edge of the open storage unit, his fingers tracing the map burned into the toy's wooden shell. The faint lines glimmered, then dimmed again, as though whispering something he was just beginning to hear. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, small and still, his face washed in the soft morning light. The glow from the toy reflected faintly in his eyes. "What do the symbols mean?" he asked. Daniel squinted at the curves and intersecting marks. "Coordinates," he murmured. "I think your father left them hidden inside the grain. He wanted us to find something." Ethan stepped closer. "Something like what?" Daniel didn't answer. His voice was low, reverent almost. "The truth?" He loaded what they could, the toy, his laptop, a few of the letters he'd recovered from Alcott's files, and they drove again, following the map as it translated into a trail of forest roads winding north. The city fell away behind them, swallowed by distance and mist. Hours passed. The roads grew narrower, rougher. Then the trees opened to reveal a valley, wild, untouched, and in its heart stood a cabin, small and simple, smoke rising faintly from a crooked chimney. Daniel slowed the car. "Your father built a place up here?" Ethan shook his head. "Not that I know of." They stepped out. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. The cabin's door creaked when Daniel pushed it open. Inside it was quiet, too quiet, but not abandoned. Dust hung in the air like mist, catching the light that filtered through the cracks. There was a table in the center of the room, and on it a collection of toys, each one glowing faintly with that same impossible light. A train, a spinning top, a bird with folded wings, all hand-carved, all alive somehow. Ethan's voice trembled. "He finished them." Daniel nodded slowly. "Or maybe they finished themselves." He reached for one of the toys, a wooden cube marked with the same carvings as the car. The moment his fingertips touched it, the entire cabin seemed to breathe. The air shifted. A hum rose from the floorboards, soft but growing. The toys began to vibrate, their light intensifying, flickering between gold and white. Then, from somewhere deep beneath the cabin, a door opened. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was like the groan of earth moving, something ancient stirring awake. Daniel found a trapdoor beneath the table, covered in sawdust. He lifted it carefully, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Ethan gripped his sleeve. "We shouldn't." Daniel looked at him. "You want to know what your father started?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. They went down together, the toy in Ethan's hand lighting the steps as they moved deeper. The air grew colder, the sound of the hum turning rhythmic, a slow pulse that matched the light. At the bottom, the passage opened into a wide underground chamber. The walls were lined with old machinery, wires and shelves of wooden figures, hundreds of them. In the center stood a large circular device made of both metal and wood, veins of golden light running through it like living arteries. Daniel recognized it from the old footage. "Project Emberlight," he whispered. Ethan stared, awe and fear mingling in his expression. "He built it here?" Daniel nodded. This was the heart of it all. The machine was humming faintly, still alive after all this time. On one side, a panel of handwritten notes was pinned to the wall. Daniel brushed the dust off, scanning the words. Resonance achieved only when both maker and receiver share emotional imprint. Pure intention amplifies the field. Synthetic replication fails. Emotion cannot be faked. Below that, a final note written shakily in Alcott's hand. "If Ethan finds this, and remember, the light was never in the wood. It was always in us." Daniel felt the breath catch in his throat. "He wasn't trying to make toys that remember," he said softly. "He was trying to show that love itself leaves an imprint on the world." The toy, they were proof. Ethan moved closer to the device. "Can it bring him back?" Daniel hesitated. "No, but maybe it can let us see what he saw." The boy reached forward, placing the glowing toy into the center of the machine. The moment it touched the platform, the entire room came alive. Light surged through the veins of the structure, racing up the walls, flooding the air. The hum turned into a low, resonant tone, deep enough to feel in their bones, and then shapes began to form in the air. Faint, flickering images like memories projected onto mist. Ethan gasped. A figure appeared, tall, kind eyes, the trace of a smile that felt familiar. His father. Not in flesh, but in light, like the echo of a dream that refuses to fade. "Dad?" The figure turned, his movements smooth, gentle, as though made of breath and memory. "Ethan." The voice was soft, layered, not quite human, like a recording filled with warmth. "You found it." Ethan stepped closer, tears gathering in his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" I wanted you to see for yourself, the echo said, to understand what we're made of. I thought I was building something for you, but I was really building it with you. The light flickered, dimming for a moment. Daniel could feel the resonance shifting and unstable. He moved closer to the machine. The system's not meant to stay open this long. The echo turned toward him. Daniel, thank you. Daniel froze. For what? For reminding me what this was about. They wanted control. You gave it back its heart. The chamber trembled. The light began to fracture into streams, spinning faster around them. Ethan reached toward the image of his father, desperate to hold it, but his hand passed through. The echo knelt slightly, meeting his eyes. You don't need me to keep building. The light is yours now. It always was. The image fractured, then burst into a cascade of glowing particles filling the air like falling stars. Ethan cried out, trying to catch them, but they dissolved against his fingers, leaving warmth behind. The machine powered down. Silence fell. Daniel knelt beside the boy, who was still staring into the fading light. He's gone, Ethan whispered. Daniel rested a hand on his shoulder. No, he said softly. He's everywhere. The air felt still again, but different now, charged with something invisible. Every object in the room seemed to hum faintly, like it remembered being touched by light. As they prepared to leave, Ethan looked back one last time. The machine sat quiet and inert, but a faint glow remained at its center. The wooden car still pulsing, steady as a heartbeat. Back above ground, the fog was thinning. The valley stretched wide and golden under the rising sun. Daniel exhaled, finally letting his shoulders fall. Ethan turned toward him. What happens now? Daniel smiled faintly, though his eyes were tired. Now we make sure they don't bury what he found. But as they walked back to the car, a sound reached them, the distant whir of engines. Daniel froze. From the ridge above the valley, black SUVs rolled down the hill, sunlight flashing off their windshields. Ms. Vale was in the first vehicle. Ethan's hand gripped Daniel's tightly. They found us. Daniel looked around, scanning the horizon. The cabin, the trees, the rising light. There was nowhere to run that didn't lead back into the open. Get in the car, he said, voice low but calm. As they sped down the dirt road, Vale's convoy followed. Dust rose behind them like smoke. Ethan clutched the glowing toy against his chest, whispering to it under his breath, as though it could hear. The cars closed in. A sharp turn, tires skidding. Daniel pulled hard on the wheel, sending their car off the road and down a narrow slope into the forest. Branches scraped the windshield, mud splashing against the glass. They stopped at the edge of a clearing. The engine wheezed. Silence again, except for the faint thrum coming from the wooden car. Ethan looked down. The glow had changed. Not golden now, but blue, steady and bright, like it was pointing somewhere. Daniel followed its light, realizing it wasn't random. The beam stretched forward, cutting through the trees, leading deeper into the forest. Vale's vehicles appeared above the ridge again, slowing. Searching, Daniel looked at Ethan. He's still leading us. The boy nodded, eyes wide. Then let's follow. They left the car and ran into the woods, the light guiding them through the trees, over roots, through streams that reflected the sky. The sound of pursuit faded behind them, and then, suddenly, they emerged into an open glade. At its center stood a tall tree, massive, ancient. Its bark was marked with carvings and the same symbols as on the toy. The light from Ethan's hand spread outward, connecting to the lines on the tree, illuminating them like veins of living fire. The entire trunk began to hum. Daniel stepped closer, heart pounding. The carvings weren't random. They were names, hundreds of them carved over years, perhaps generations. At the top, nearly lost among the lines, was one freshly cut. Lily Reed. Daniel's breath caught. My daughter, he whispered. He carved her name. Ethan looked up at him, voice trembling. He said the light was in us. Daniel touched the bark gently. The glow flared, enveloping both of them in a soft, warm brilliance. The tree's hum deepened, rising into a sound that felt less like noise and more like truth. Something ancient, something human. In that light, Daniel understood. The toys weren't vessels of technology. They were vessels of remembrance, fragments of love anchored to the world, binding those who had lost with those who still carried them forward. The glow began to fade, returning to stillness. The forest quieted. Ethan looked up at him. "So what now?" Daniel smiled, a single tear tracing his cheek. "Now we build again, but not for profit. Not for power, for memory." Behind them, the wind shifted. Distant engines rumbled once more, echoing through the trees. But for the first time, Daniel wasn't afraid. He turned toward the sound, standing tall beside the boy, because now the world itself seemed to hum with them, and somewhere, in that living silence between heartbeats, something, or someone, whispered back. The forest was still humming when they began their walk back through the fading light. The air was heavy with the scent of moss and rain, and each step seemed to echo more softly than the last. Behind them, the great tree shimmered one final time as though exhaling after holding its breath for centuries. Then the glow sank back into the bark, leaving behind nothing but the sound of wind. The sun was setting now, washing the valley in a pale amber glow that caught the edges of the leaves and made them gleam like glass. Daniel and Ethan walked side by side without speaking, the quiet between them filled with everything words couldn't carry. The boy held the toy close to his chest. It was dim now, its pulse faint but still alive, like a small heart that refused to give up. They reached the cabin as the first stars began to bloom in the sky. The SUVs were gone. Tire tracks cut through the dirt road, but the men who'd followed them had vanished without a trace. Only the whisper of the wind remained, the kind that makes the world feel older than it looks. Daniel pushed open the cabin door. Inside, the air was cool and still. The machine underground was silent now, but he could feel its echo in the floorboards, as though the memory of what had happened there was still moving beneath their feet. Ethan sat by the window, staring out at the forest. The boy looked different somehow, not older exactly, but steadier. His gaze had that quiet knowing that only comes after you've seen something no one else would believe. "He's really gone, isn't he?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked around the room at the unfinished toys, the hand-carved details, the drawings still pinned to the walls. "Maybe," he said at last. "Or maybe he's just everywhere you look now." Ethan turned toward him, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Look," Daniel continued, picking up one of the small wooden birds from the table. "Every mark, every cut, your father made this with his hands. His thoughts, his love, his time, all of that lives in the wood now. That doesn't disappear just because he's gone. It becomes something else, something that waits to be found again." The boy ran his thumb along the glowing toy, tracing the carved lines. "Do you think he knew this would happen?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I think he knew that love always leaves a map behind. We just have to learn how to read it." Outside, the forest was shifting into night. Fireflies rose from the tall grass, their lights flickering in and out, echoing the pulse from the toy in Ethan's hands. The sight made Daniel pause. It felt almost like the world was answering back. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's head back before it gets too dark." They packed what little they had, some tools, the letters, the toy, and began the slow drive down the valley road. The car hummed softly against the gravel. The headlights cut through the mist, and in that light, every droplet of rain seemed suspended in time. Ethan leaned his head against the window, watching the trees slide by. After a long silence, he said, "Do you ever miss someone so much that even when you finally understand why they left, it still hurts?" Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel. "Every day," he said. "But the pain," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "it means they mattered. It means part of them is still inside you. We only stop hurting when we stop remembering. And I think forgetting is the real kind of loss." The boy nodded quietly, his reflection blurred against the glass. They reached the city just past midnight. Everything felt different, quieter somehow, as if the noise of the world had dimmed to let the night breathe. Daniel parked near the edge of the river, where the skyline stretched in 1,000 trembling reflections. The hum of distant traffic mingled with the soft rhythm of water against the rocks. Ethan stepped out, the toy still glowing faintly in his hand. He held it up, and the reflection of its light rippled across the river's surface. "He used to bring me here," he said, "when I was little." He said the city lights reminded him of the stars. Daniel smiled. He wasn't wrong. For a while they just stood there listening to the water. Then Daniel spoke again quietly. "What are you going to do now, Ethan?" The boy thought for a long time. I want to build, he said finally. Not machines, not for money. I want to build things that make people feel like this, like they remember something they forgot they knew. Daniel felt something stir in his chest, a warmth that felt close to pride. Then that's what you should do. They stood in silence again, the kind that feels like a conversation between souls. Then from across the bridge, headlights appeared. For a heartbeat, Daniel tensed, thinking it might be Vale. But it wasn't. Just an old truck passing through the quiet streets, carrying the hum of ordinary life. The danger, the chase, it was all behind them now. Days turned to weeks. The valley was left untouched, its secret buried beneath trees and silence. Daniel went back to his workshop, though it felt different now. He no longer built for the contracts or deadlines. He built for something smaller, quieter, toys that didn't need to light up to mean something. Toys that simply held a story. Ethan visited often, helping when he could. He'd bring sketches, ideas, small pieces of wood with half-carved shapes. They never talked much about what had happened. But sometimes when the light hit the right angle, the toy on Daniel's shelf would pulse softly, like it remembered. One evening, as autumn settled in, Ethan arrived with a box in his hands. He set it on the table and opened it carefully. Inside was a new toy, a small tree carved from dark oak, its roots wrapping around a glass core. Inside the glass was a faint, flickering light. I made it from what we found, he said quietly. It's not perfect, but... Daniel stared at it, unable to speak. It's beautiful, he finally managed. Ethan smiled, shy but proud. I called it the remembering tree. They placed it on the windowsill. As dusk fell, the light inside it began to glow a little brighter, catching the reflection of the stars. Time passed. The world outside moved on, and the story of the Alcott heir, the billionaire's son, the mysterious invention, the vanishing company, became just another rumor swallowed by the endless scroll of news. But for Daniel and Ethan, it wasn't a rumor. It was a promise. And sometimes late at night, when the wind swept softly through the trees outside Daniel's workshop, the faint hum of ember light would return. Not loud, not haunting. Just a quiet reminder that love, when given freely, never fades. It transforms. Months later, Daniel found himself standing by that river again, watching the city lights shimmer. He thought about Alcott, about the man who had tried to build light out of love and in the process had taught others how to see it. He thought about Ethan, who had turned grief into creation, and about his own daughter, Lily, whose name had been carved into the roots of something eternal. He closed his eyes. The world around him felt different now, still broken in places, still loud, still uncertain, but also alive in ways he hadn't noticed before. The hum of the world was no longer something he feared. It was something he finally understood. As he turned to leave, he noticed a small shape near the edge of the riverbank, a single wooden bird resting in the reeds. One of Alcott's toys. Its eyes flickered once faintly before going still again. Daniel smiled. Not everything needed to move to be alive. He picked it up, brushed the dirt from its wings, and whispered, "Rest easy, my friend." "You've already flown?" Then he placed it gently on the water. The current carried it away, its reflection merging with the stars. Behind him, the city glowed, full of stories, full of light. Ahead of him, the road stretched quiet and open. He walked on, each step steady, each breath calm. Somewhere deep inside, he carried the hum, that small, invisible frequency that tied one heart to another, one story to the next. And as the night deepened, a question rose softly in his mind, echoing like a voice that came not from outside, but from within. What if every act of kindness, every piece of love we leave behind, is just another way the world learns to remember itself? The wind stirred in answer, gentle and endless. The stars rippled in the river, and for a moment, just a brief, perfect moment, the whole world seemed to glow,